Well, on February 9th, 2008, Sammy took her own life at just 38 years of age. Most of us would call it a near-death experience, but Kelly will tell you no, she actually did die. It wasn't her time to leave this physical world, however, and she was sent back. That was 12 years ago, and today she joins us to talk about her life since. Hello, Kelly.
Hi, Dean. Good to be here with you.
Great to have you here. Okay, so let's just wind back the clock 12 years and let's summarize what took place on that day.
Yeah, I won't spend a ton of time talking about, what led up to that, but we will just say that a life of victimhood and a life of thinking everything was happening to me led up to ultimately creating in a diseased mind an idea or a concept that my family and my life would be better off without me. And through that diseased mind, proceeded to plan and carry out the act of suicide. Stored medication for a while, prepared for this, and not being a drinker, I did lots of research and I knew what to do to mix alcohol with certain pills, and I was ready, and off I went with my pills, my alcohol, my plan, and a pad of paper and a pen to write suicide notes. And um, took myself somewhere quite away, lived in a very remote place on an island in New Zealand at the time. And I didn't pick the destination in advance. I just spontaneously drove to a remote location, and I definitely wanted to carry through this act. It was not an attempt for attention or wanting someone to rescue me. I made sure I was going to be able to get somewhere and carry this through. Over a several-hour period of time, I sat in my SUV on a beautiful bluff looking down over the ocean and wrote suicide notes. And the last one that I wrote was to whoever was going to discover my body, assuming it was probably going to be an EMT or a land worker, and apologizing to them for that being their job, which really was in my heart at the moment. And by this stage, I could feel the medication kicking in and the alcohol, and knew to get in the back of the SUV and lay down. So I proceeded to do so, and having been raised Catholic and living with the idea that suicide was a sin and I would be going to hell, I just remember saying over and over and over in my head, probably merely as an act of justification more than prayer, I know that God is a loving God. I know that this will be forgiven. And then I just kept asking, are you still breathing? And this wasn't an audible conversation. This was just something I kept saying over and over in my own head. And I don't know how long that went on for, because again, the medication and alcohol had kicked in, but I just remember feeling a little queasy. And the next thing I knew, I was feeling sensation, and outside of the SUV and outside of the car, very heavy popping sounds, a lot of pressure, and looking down at the body, watching the body, and recognizing that I wasn't attached to it. There was no attachment to what it was going through. There was no sadness about it. There was no regret. There was no, I've got to get back in there. It was really more of a curiosity, I think is a good word to describe it. Just kind of naturally curious, almost like I was watching a movie, like what's happening with that thing down there.
Did you feel any empathy with your body?
None. There was no empathy with the body, no empathy with what was happening. There was no thoughts that it was wrong or right. There was no, I want to get back in there. There was no, where am I going next? Like there was, it was just kind of witnessing or watching is how I would describe it, with the realization that I was no longer in a body. I was an energy, and really no curiosity about that either, which to this day I know is because now I understand that we do that all the time. We just have no recollection that we're doing that. And the SUV was like, there was no top to it, and I was just above it, looking down, seeing the body writher and seeing the body seemed to struggle, but not feeling any of that. There was no pain, no suffering, no empathy or sadness for that body. And obviously there was just not a whole lot of interest in sticking around, because the next thing that happened was just more of that popping, cracking sound. Very much, I would describe it like it was in the ears, but there were no ears. It was so audible. It permeated me. And what I describe in most of my near death is that it wasn't that I was hearing it, I was it.
Right.
I was the energy of the popping. I was the energy of the sensation of pressure. I was the energy of all of it. Whatever was being experienced, I wasn't separate from that. So the sensation of an upward pull and cracking and this thrusting, if you will, into this next area that was just darkness. There was no fear about it. There was no, oh my gosh, I'm in purgatory or I'm in hell or what's going on. None of that was going on. In fact, there was no direct correlation with what seemed to be the experience and the identity of Kelly, which is why I now refer to myself as the story of Kelly, because there's real knowing that they are very much two separate things.
Right.
Again, don't know the amount of time that was spent in this darkness. I just remember feeling a tremendous amount of love. I felt held. I wasn't a body. There was no concern for what was apparently going on with the other thing, the entity of Kelly. There was no concern about this being where I might be stuck. I just felt held and loved.
Did you feel any presence?
Not in that darkness, no. And I will say why I think that is, because I truly believe that's where I was part of what I refer to as nothingness or everythingness. So there's nothing separate there.
Right.
Why there's just this permeation of complete and utter love. So I would describe that to me in my mind as the most beautiful connection to a God source or a God energy or a universe energy, whatever you refer to it as, the everythingness or nothingness.
Yeah.
No duality at all. There's no separation at all. There's just an experience and not even an experiencer. So again, no correlation or connection to understanding what amount of time was spent there. And the next recollection I had was this thrusting, popping energy again, and this sensation of pulling up. No body to be pulling, just this awareness of all of this. And again, I was it. And then just this beautiful, what I describe as a baby pink, and it's a color we just do not have here. Everything that I point to, that I speak of, I have to use language to point to it. But I say often when I speak of this, there's no words that point to what I will share with you.
Right.
So it's kind of like clanging about with this clunky ability we have to communicate, where if telepathically I could just show you, would be more in alignment to what I now recognize.
Okay.
So this beautiful, very, very, very light pastel pink that I've never been able to see again. And again, I wasn't witnessing it, I was it. This amazing smell, which again, I wasn't smelling it, I was it. The closest thing I've linked to it was almost like a gardenia smell, floral. Auditable, what I would call angelic music, but not music, just I was it. Just so much beauty, an overwhelmed feeling, recognizing I wasn't a body, no fear about it. And then this relationship is the best word I can think of, or realization that I was unfolding. This energy if you were to imagine your body being, constricted inside of a tin can, and all of a sudden somehow you're not. And even though you're not a physical entity, just this expansion, this feeling of, I get to spread out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it felt like. Just this energying
Mm-hmm.
so prolifically.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So go ahead.
so again, no presence other than what you were feeling yourself, or were being yourself. But did you actually come across another presence eventually?
Yeah. So again, no real understanding of how long I was in this space. I did start to recognize that just by, again, words challenging, thinking the thought. There was no thinker. There was just this, a thought would arise and then I would be there, or a thought would happen and then the outcome of that was the experience. So in some way, again, I correlate this to when we're not in ego, when we're not in a conscious state, this is a very normal pattern and rhythm for us to do. And I think that that aspect or energy knew that. And so it didn't take time to understand how to manipulate or work with the energy of itself, is the
Right.
best way to describe it. And there was just this knowing that there was more to happen here. The next thing I realized was a sensation of that. There's more to happen here. And I see off what I would call in a distance, again, words are so hard, but it wasn't separate from me, but in this moment appeared separate. And I now know it to be Archangel Gabriel. And I just had this knowing that that's where I was to go, to follow. And so that's what happens. Just this energy of movement without any body to move. Because I never presented in any form to myself in this experience at all. There was never a body for me. I was just the pink or
Mm-hmm.
the smell or the sound.
Yeah.
In the gentle waving of Gabriel, which I knew was follow, there was just following happening. There wasn't an identity that was following. I'll pause in case you have questions there.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, so no communication going on at that time, even telepathically?
No, I mean, like I said, just the knowing to follow, and that was all that needed to happen. It was a knowing. It wasn't, conversation. I had many experiences. I've spoken with about a lot of them in my near-death video series, but with this particular portion, if you will, there wasn't a dialogue. There wasn't a. It was just
Right.
come.
Did you recognize or feel any other presence, say from relatives or
I
people
did.
you knew?
Yeah, I did have that experience. I would say later, further on in the dialogue, and I don't ever go back and watch my near-death experience, and a lot has happened since then. So I will preface this by saying some of this is stuff that's happened since, and some of it is stuff that happened then. And even 12 years later, I'm still getting downloads because I think a lot happened that I didn't bring back with me in a knowledge form that's
Mm-hmm.
now coming in packets of information, including further elaborating on a relationship with, I now know to be my birth guide, Bernadette, who we do a lot of collaborative work together. And at that stage, there was no interaction with any of that. There was just come. And that was when I would call it, the life review. That's what other people have referred to it as. Again, people have put names against everything that's happened.
Yeah.
For me, I try not to label any of it because to this day, I don't understand it.
Yeah. So explain who Bernadette is.
So Bernadette is what I would refer to as a birth guide. What I find really interesting, because Kelly is not who Kelly was before this experience. I lived a life, 38 years of victimhood. And after this, I've just trusted life. I find that I don't ask questions. And I know that may sound weird to people who might be watching this, or even my audience that's been following me for 12 years. Like, I would be asking questions all the time. And I'm like, no, you come back with such a level of trust that all of the inquiry just falls away. You just say, if I'm supposed to know that, it's going to arise. So what I find interesting is, literally in a recent interview, some questions came up that caused me to ask questions I haven't asked, which then opened Bernadette up to sharing more about our relationship, which I find fascinating. And part of that is what leads us, I think, to have this conversation, which is, there's a bigger connection here to what I would call the light council. There is definitely some correlation with, I don't like using this word, but alien, other beings, other presence. And yet there's still not this, I've got to stay up all night and understand this thing going on, which it's still curious to me, because it feels like I'm so removed from this thing. Like, the old Kelly would be asking all these questions, but this thing that's driving this is just like, well, if I'm supposed to know, it'll come through.
Yeah. Is a birth guide something or someone that everyone has?
Yeah. So we each are, before we incarnate, for lack of a better word, into a physical body, or we believe ourselves to be the incarnate, we do have a soul plan. We have a plan of the things, the experiences that we wish to engage in when we think we're the separate energy or body. And we very much get to help plan that. What I was shown is that it's not a classroom. We're not here because we're being punished. We're not here to work through old karma or old ancestral muck. Those are all beliefs and conditioning that we have been taught. And the reality is, it's all experience. If I am all of this, which I am, and I experience that in that darkness, how can I know any of it individually? And so the incarnation is just, I want to experience what it feels like to have an arm. I want to experience what it feels like to know love. Well, to have that as a mirror, being all of it, I need a dualistic component to see myself doing that, right? Because if you have a mirror saying, who am I? Well, it can't experience itself. So it needs something else for that experience. And that's what the incarnate, or the belief of the incarnate, is. And so these birth guides are part of that everythingness, but in that identity of wanting to be a separate self, we have these guides that we choose, that I call experts. If you were going through a divorce and you needed a divorce lawyer, you would get a divorce lawyer, right? That's what you would look up in the phone book. And we have different guides that come into our experience, our soul plan or our soul map, at different times throughout our incarnation, and they are experts in that area. For whatever reason, we're all assigned a birth guide. But some folks, I find, their birth guides are very inactive in their lives because they have so many experiential guides. For me, Bernadette always agreed to come through at this time and really guide me in this experience. So we're very connected.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think if there's a comparison to make with a birth guide. Is it something like we call intuition?
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. In fact, I say to people who doubt themselves, I don't have to physically see Bernadette now. After my experience, in fact, when I was in the emergency room after all of this had happened, the first time she came through, she was very much a physical presence for me. And I needed that because I thought that I had damaged my brain. And so for her to be that connected to me, I needed to see something physical, because if I had just expected myself to hear an intuitive thought of, you're okay, I don't think I would have trusted it. So she very much presented to me in a physical way. But yes, those of us who have intuition or have aha moments, or something seems to be trying to divert our attention, if there's like a car accident, very much a guide intervention. Yep.
Okay. Just before we look at your life since, you talked about a life review. What was all that about? What did that tell you?
Yeah, it was really interesting because, again, growing up Catholic, I didn't watch near-death experience videos. I didn't have any understanding of what other people had been through. Of course, I had heard of people having what I would refer to as a near-death, and I think I was maybe even a little skeptical. Believed in a God for sure. So when this life review happened, I didn't know what to expect, but I later found out that some people have had very different versions of what I had. Mine was 38 years of experience that seemed to flicker in 30 seconds. I mean, it was really fast. The review was just seconds. And I knew intuitively, wow, we live in a dense environment where everything feels really long from a time perspective. But that's not the reality. The reality is this is seconds. And that life review was just a flicker of some of those experiences. And there was nothing and no one sitting there saying, do you see how you harmed that person? Do you see how you hurt that person? Do you see how you wronged that person? There was no dualistic component. It was just, look at all these amazing experiences. And what I felt in that moment, even though there was nobody there celebrating with me, was a celebration of life, an energy of, wow, that's so cool. All that.
So a celebration of both good and bad.
Yes, yes. No dualistic component, and no thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to get punished, or oh my gosh, could I go to a hell or a purgatory? And again, being raised with that very much put into my head, one would think that that would be a fear, but there was no fear. None. Felt loved.
Yeah. I heard you speak recently about, I'm not sure whether you were referring to the life review, but you were talking about a plan before you enter a physical body. Is it like you have a plan drawn up and that's what you follow throughout life?
Yeah, so before you have a plan, you have some idea of the experiences you would like to have. So to know love, we must know the absence of it. That's part of this component. So when you sit and you map out the things you want to experience, there's a reality and a knowing that everything that you've mapped has a dualistic component to it. So I want to know love, therefore somewhere in here I have to know the absence of that. So it's almost like mapping out the experience of each thing with its dualistic component, and then saying, okay, in order to have these experiences, I need these others in my play. And so you will come through as my grandfather. You will come through as my son. You will come through as my mother. You will abandon me. You will forsake me. You will love me dearly, and I will break your heart. All of these things are mapped out, and they're determined, and they're planned. And I came back with a real understanding for myself that free will is a concept.
Well, in Christianity, we're all taught from the Bible. We're all taught about the free will that we have. But does this go against that?
Yeah, and it's been a challenge in my sharing, but it's one that I'm being led to be pretty, not forceful, but a pretty consistent in delivering that message, because there are so many people that are out there sharing about free will. And in my mind, that's where more of the suffering comes in than anything, because what I was shown and what I came back with, in fact, have it tattooed on my arm now, which is my only role here, is to breathe and not resist. Because I do remember wanting to know that before I came back into the body. What do you need from me? What am I supposed to do with all this? Breathe and don't resist. The rest is taken care of. And that has been, since for the last 12 years, the way I've lived. I breathe, I don't resist, I don't ask questions, I'm not inquiring, I'm not stuck in a brain that's constantly churning, wanting to know the next thing. It's just this moment I'm breathing and I'm not resisting, and look how beautiful it is.
Mm.
Yet if free will's in there thinking I have to make a decision or a choice, that's, oars in the water going against the tide.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating because I also take it to another level, and I tend to analyze people a lot. For example, you'll see some people are so successful that they can do no wrong. Everything they touch turns to gold, and others who follow the exact plan struggle and they just can't nail or get close to any success. So do you think it's perhaps just people staying true to their respective plans?
Yeah, I mean, this is interesting that you asked this question, and there's no coincidences, of course. But recently, this is a topic that came up. I had a live session with my Nurture Your Soul community, and somebody asked something similar, and so Bernadette jumped in, and so I'm going to let her kind of answer this question. But what she came through with was really interesting, even to me, which is, although there's not free will, there is a veil, and the veil is based on that which appears to think itself real.
Hmm.
Kelly, story of Kelly. Um, Leaning, for lack of a better word, towards what one might believe is the world happening to her versus for her.
Right, right.
So, although we're not making a choice, remember, if there is a for you, there's a to you, because duality creates that, right?
Hmm.
If there is this component, there always has to be this component, which tells me it's not true. Because if there's duality, it's not truth. And I've yet to find anything that doesn't have a dualistic component, which tells me none of this is true. That's a different topic. So if there is an idea of resistance and non-resistance, somewhere in the middle, there's a finite crack where awareness is peeking through and saying, this is the truth. Somehow this identity thinks itself one or the other. So the one that seems to be moving through life with the momentum that seems easy, and someone seems to be on that same path, but they're moving through life and it seems to be one hurdle after another, they both have the opportunity in that crack to recognize, breathe and don't resist. For whatever reason, the one seems to be doing that and life has the momentum going for them. And so, we've all had that day where we wake up and everything just feels good and it
Hmm.
just vibes. And it just seems to be one good thing after another, green lights and free coffees and good moods. And then the next day we wake up and spill our coffee first thing and it's red lights and traffic jams. And so why is that? It's a subtle, tiny, everything about this is subtle, by the way. The universe is hysterical. I mean, I laugh all the time because it's so funny.
Hmm.
It's so subtle, we trip over it all day. Breathe and don't resist, right? So when I notice the spilling of the coffee and the mind going to that, there's just laughter now. Breathe, set the coffee cup down, and don't resist. And notice what's around you. Perfect air. I'm okay. This is okay. The coffee is okay. And then there just seems to be a gentleness of being back in a rhythm. Again, it's not free will, it's that both components are existing.
Yeah, yeah. It's a great message, especially for people suffering from say disorders like depression. If they could grasp the concept of this, it would make a huge difference to their well-being.
That's the work I do today. You just nailed the head of the work that I do today. So work with people who are struggling with um, depression, anxiety, spiritual disconnect, whatever you want to call it, and try to, I call it the finger pointing to the moon, because this is all so subtle. It really isn't a teaching. It's not a lesson. It's not a guidance system. It's not something that you want to, in fact, I haven't had one person say to me, I haven't had that thought myself. That it's so intuitively known by us, because again, we do this when we're not in the egoic state, in the conscious state. This is our normal way of being. So it's our true divine nature that we just seem to forget when we wake up. So we overcomplicate it is the problem. We
Yeah.
overcomplicate it, and the depression is, I've forgotten who I am.
Right. Right.
Return to self. It's a return to the self.
Yeah. Yeah. Kelly, talk about your adjustment back to life when you returned to your body. Was it a tough one?
Yeah, I mean, the first couple of weeks, I'm not going to lie, it was a little scary. I mean, I had moments of pure euphoria and bliss. That was most of what I was experiencing. I couldn't be still. The molecular awareness was so high that if I sat and looked at anything, I just saw moving atoms. I felt like I was going to fall through the couch, or I felt like I was going to be pulled up into the ceiling, because anything I even put my focus on became movement.
Mm-hmm.
And that went on for several weeks. I could not stop writing things down. Bumblebees were talking to me. It was just so much was coming up, and a nervousness about getting it out, not because I needed to share it with anyone, but it just needed to come up and out somehow. And then, of course, seeing dead people and these other, what I would call entities that were, connecting with me, especially at nighttime. I now know that I was fearful of that because it was unknown to me. Once the fear let go, I recognized, oh, they're not scary at all. My mind's telling me they're scary. And as soon as that let go, then I could experience them as beautiful and blissful. And, but I returned to the same ick that I tried to escape from. And so here's this world that obviously felt dysfunctional and abrasive to me, that was so much so that I wanted to kill myself. But that's exactly what I returned to, but I wasn't the same person at all.
Yeah. Yeah. What about your senses? You talked about those being heightened, and you seem to have some special abilities.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't call them special at all. In fact, what I was shown is that this is our normal true divine nature, and we turn it off. As soon as we're born, we're told you're a girl, your name is Kelly, this is your mom, this is your dad, and the labels start as soon as you're out of the womb, which is why I laugh to this day when I see a newborn baby, because I, say to them, kiddo, I'm
Mm-hmm.
sorry.
Yeah.
Every action that you know to be true is getting ready to be um, ridden over on top of a beautiful clean canvas, and you're going to be splattered with paint. And then as you get older, you're going to be shown on how to unsplatter that paint. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm not special. I don't have anything that you don't have. I just have an awareness that I am tapped in and turned on at all times. And so that infinite ability is just there. And every time I hear myself say something like, no, I'm not a medical intuitive, it seems like the next day that encyclopedia download comes through. So again, I just laugh a lot now.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned babies. It was quite a while ago. I was reading a study of babies, newborn babies, and even a year into their life, and oftentimes a baby will lay in its crib, and you could be leaning over it, and he or she could be looking straight past you, and then suddenly smile. And I'm always thought, is that an angel they're communicating with? Birth guide.
Absolutely. It could be an ancestor. It could be the energy of that godness. I speak of cats often. I have a mentally ill cat, and I have a father who's in stage 4 dementia, and I telepathically can communicate with both of them. And what I hear is that we believe that they are suffering, but the reality is they have the best of both worlds. They have a foot here and a foot there, and they're experiencing both. And so same with babies. they come into this incarnation, but one of the most beautiful graces of the energy of God, energy we call God or universe or whatever you refer to it as, allows the grace of a tether, that knowingness for some period of time. And it's almost like a transition or an adoption to remember the soul plan. You're okay. You know, you're going to forget this for a while, but you're going to remember it at certain periods throughout your life. You're going to be out on the ocean when you're 13 and you're going to think, I'm so small. There's something bigger than this. And that's us. We're going to keep popping in your awareness and your experience and giving you glimpses of memory of who you really are. You're going to think you're small, but we're going to keep reminding you that you're not. That's our love.
Yeah. You often hear the term, leave the past in the past. Did you find that, and one thing I'm being guilty of, and everyone has, is holding grudges and animosity against certain people from things that may have happened 30 or 40 years ago, and they still pop up in your mind. Do you still get those, or have they been cleansed, or so to speak?
There's still very human traits that are going on here. Anger, sadness, jealousy, all of those traits still arise. But what I've noticed is they're not like Velcro anymore. There's just nothing that believes them, and it just turns to laughter. Because again, the story of Kelly, or the character of Kelly, is still very much present, but there's this, a deeper awareness or deeper knowingness that is just watching and saying, oh, look at you, you cutie, you're out there having a jealousy experience. Woohoo, that's fun. There's no, that's right, wrong, good, bad. But there seems to be a compassionate energy behind it that's like, all right, sweetheart, you've lost your way. Come back in my arms. Let's remember who you are. And so it doesn't stick around. So those that have harmed, very much a cleansing experience. But even to this day, there's, childhood wound stuff that I'm clearing, not because I feel it on the surface, but I feel it in the subconscious. And so that part of the mind is the one that's the trickery, the one that wants to tell the story. We call it the ego, which isn't a bad thing. We think we're supposed to kill it. We're not. We're supposed to make peace and love it and invite it on the journey. And then those traumas and those things we believe ourselves to have been through can let go and release. Yeah.
Has your personality changed since 2008? And if it has, have people gotten used to it?
Yeah, I mean, my sister, probably within a day or so, I just killed myself. I'm in the hospital. I'm in New Zealand. My whole family's back here in the US. And I get to talk to my sister the next day, and I was just in pure euphoria. And I was telling her everything, and she was even saying things like, this doesn't sound like you. Are you sure you're okay? You don't talk like that. Are you sure you're all right? She was really concerned. And I just kept saying, yeah, I'm fine. I mean, everything changed. The way I dress, the foods I like to eat, the way that I carry myself, the language that I use. To this day, words come out of my mouth that I have to look up. They're not my words.
Yep.
And what I will say is that there's just such a trust of what's coming through now that I just get excited about what's going to come through. Right now, I don't know what's going to come through. I don't know what's going to come out of this mouth.
Yeah. So, so what is Kelly doing today? You talked about working with people with disorders, hospice, but what's your main focus today?
It's shifting. I've continued to do work in the corporate environment because I had a son to raise, and I'm a single mom. He's now off at college, and that's starting to shift and morph to moving more into doing it yourself full time. For the last 12 years, it's all been word of mouth. People have been referred to me. I've never done anything more than a YouTube channel and a Facebook page. I don't promote. I don't push. Just a trusting of the divine guidance, and people who need one-on-one counseling, I do that with them. I feel that becoming more of a pull um, yeah, you know, it's different with each person that I sit in front of. And I guess the way that I approach it is that I'm not sitting in front of another. This is a mirror. This is an aspect of Kelly that's arising in that moment to be met with love and understanding. And as it's met with love and understanding, whatever seems to have been there falls away.
Right, right. Do you know other NDEs? And if you do you have like a special connection?
I don't. It's, again, this is that thing that I know is probably so weird for you and others to hear, because again, the Kelly before this would have been like watching every NDE she could get her hands on. There's something that is just not interested, and it's not egoic. It's not like my experience was better than your experience. There's this knowingness that the experience I had was exactly what I needed to have, and that there's no need to muddy that water, that each unique aspect that seems to be having other experiences are also a part of me. So on a bigger intellectual knowing and the infinite wisdom that I can tap into, that's already stored somewhere here. There's
Yeah.
no necessity to go watch their YouTubes or try to understand why their experience was this way and mine was that. There's just not a curiosity about it. So no, you know, I've been invited to many speaking engagements to speak to other people who have interests in near death. So in those engagements, I've heard people get up and tell their stories, but there's not a natural curiosity for Kelly to go and watch that.
Yeah, yeah. Kelly, I'm just about to wrap it up. We're almost out of time, but the other thing I wanted to talk to you about on the flip side of NDEs are pre-death experiences. And you mentioned you work in hospices, and I know that there's more than a story or two to be told by nurses that work in hospices, and most of them won't talk about their experiences, but the ones that do, people seem to get a preview of you know, before they die, of what to expect. Have you found that?
Absolutely. Um, a lot of things like, grandma was here last night. She came on the train. She'll be picking me up today. Or if they're able to speak, if they're in full-blown palliative care and they're, you know, they're medicated, what I'll often see is just a beautiful vibrance to their energy, similar to what you described with the baby, almost peering off into a corner, maybe even some movement up the wall, and then a breath in, and they've left us. And I find it beautiful because, and you'll hear hospice workers say this a lot, that last breath is usually a breath in, not an exhale.
Yeah.
So a lot of hospice workers will say they took that breath with them.
Right, right. Fascinating. Kelly, thanks very much for being with us today. And you talked about your YouTube channel. It's called Nurture Your Soul.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And
Yep.
what about your Facebook page?
Hey, Nurture Your Soul. Yeah.
Okay. And if anyone reaches out to you, you know, looking for some advice or help in any way, you're open to give it to them?
Yeah, I have quite a few volunteers that help me with scheduling and that sort of thing, because this is it's getting to be more than I can manage on my own. So I just ask people to be patient, and someone will get back to you. And I try to share as much as I can, as freely as I can, through YouTubes and regular updates and daily updates on Facebook. The work that I do in one-on-ones, I try to return as much, if not all of it, to the work that I do with hospice or at-risk youth. And this is shifting again. So it's a constant metamorphosis, and the relationship with Bernadette seems to be guiding that. So I find that there seems to be cyclicals of what people are reaching out and support, and I'm able to do videos that seem to hit a collaborative, larger scale of what everybody's interested in. And it's fascinating to me how it works too.
Okay. So Nurture Your Soul is Kelly's YouTube channel. Check it out. It's fascinating stuff, as I mentioned. Kelly, once again, thank you, and I hope we catch up again.
I do too, Dean. Thank you for the time. Much love to all of you.
Thank you. Kelly Sammy joining us today.